The back of Marco Vittorio's hand connected with the nanny's cheek before Elena could even process what was happening. She stood frozen in the doorway of the massive dining room, her worn canvas bag slipping from her shoulder, as the older woman crumpled against the marble floor. "You fed my children what?" Marco's voice was ice, each word precisely carved. "Fast food? Processed garbage? In my home?" The nanny, a severe woman named Mrs. Pritchard, scrambled to her knees. "Mr. Vittorio, I only thought the children were hungry, and you thought?" He circled her slowly, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the floor. "I don't pay you 6 figures a year to think. I pay you to follow instructions." Elena should have turned around. Should have walked right back out through the service entrance where the employment agency had directed her that morning. This wasn't her business. She was only here to interview for a housekeeping position, and clearly she'd walked into the middle of something that had nothing to do with her. But then she saw them. 2 children, a boy and a girl, maybe 7 and 5 years old, pressed against the far wall of the dining room. The girl had her arms wrapped around her brother, her face buried in his shoulder. Both of them were trembling. "Please, Mr. Vittorio," Mrs. Pritchard begged. "I've been with your family for 3 months. I won't—" "You're done." He pulled out his phone without looking at her. "Security will escort you out. You have 10 minutes to collect your things." That's when the little girl started crying. Not loud, theatrical crying. Quiet, hitching sobs that spoke of a child who'd learned that showing emotion only made things worse. The sound cut through Elena like broken glass. She didn't plan what happened next. She'd always had a problem with her mouth, with speaking up when keeping quiet would serve her better. It was why she'd lost 3 jobs in the past year, why she'd been evicted from her apartment, why her sister told her she'd never amount to anything if she didn't learn to just shut up and blend in. Maybe she was just trying to help. The words came out softer than she intended, but they might as well have been a gunshot for how completely they changed the atmosphere in the room. Marco Vittorio turned slowly, and Elena got her first real look at him. The employment agency hadn't been exaggerating. He was striking in the way that dangerous things are striking. Sharp angles, cold gray eyes, a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile years ago. He wore a black suit that probably cost more than Elena had earned in the past 6 months combined, and when those gray eyes locked onto her, she felt the temperature drop 10 degrees. "And you are?" "Nobody." Elena's hands were shaking, so she gripped the strap of her bag tighter. "I'm nobody. I had an interview scheduled for 9:30, and I came in through the back like they told me to, and I'm sorry. I should go. An interview for what position?" "Housekeeping. But I can see this is a bad time, so I'll just stay where you are." He held up one hand, still looking at her with those unsettling eyes. Then he glanced at Mrs. Pritchard, who had managed to pull herself to her feet. 10 minutes. Starting now." The nanny fled without another word, her heels clicking rapidly across the marble until a door slammed somewhere in the depths of the enormous house. Elena wanted to follow her. Every survival instinct she had was screaming at her to run. But the little girl was still crying those quiet, heartbreaking sobs, and the boy was whispering something to her in Italian that sounded like, "It's okay! It's okay!" And Elena couldn't make her feet move. Marco walked toward her, and she fought the urge to step back. He stopped about 3 feet away, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and woody that probably had an Italian name she couldn't pronounce. "What did you say your name was?" "Elena." "Elena Morrison." "And you think I was too harsh with Mrs. Pritchard? Elena Morrison?" This was a test. She could feel it in the way he asked the question, in the slight tilt of his head, in the way his hand rested casually in his pocket, like he had all the time in the world to dissect whatever answer she gave. The smart thing would be to backtrack, apologize, tell him what he clearly wanted to hear. But Elena had been poor her entire life, and the one thing poverty had taught her was that she didn't have much to lose anymore. "I think your children are terrified," she said quietly. "And I think Mrs. Pritchard probably made a mistake, but she's the 3rd person they've seen fired in as many months based on the dates on the termination records I passed in the office." His eyebrow rose slightly. You looked at confidential files? They were on the desk. I can read upside down. She swallowed hard. Look, Mr. Vittorio, you clearly don't need me here. I'll go. But maybe... She glanced at the children, who were watching this exchange with wide, frightened eyes. Maybe just talk to them? They look hungry and scared, and like they could really use, "You're overstepping." I know. I'm sorry. I do that. Elena finally let her feet move, turning toward the door. I'm really sorry. I'll show myself out. The agency said you've worked with children before. She stopped. Yes. I was a teacher's aide for 2 years before the school district had budget cuts. And I babysit sometimes when I can get the work. Why were you evicted from your last apartment? The question was so unexpected that Elena turned back around. How do you... I have security run background checks on everyone who enters my home. The report came through on my phone while you were defending my former employee. He pulled out his phone, scrolled through something. 3 jobs in the past year. Evicted 4 months ago. Currently living with your sister in a 1-bedroom apartment in South Boston. You were late on your last car payment. He looked up. Financial instability suggests poor judgment. Heat flooded Elena's cheeks. I was evicted because I reported my landlord for safety violations and he retaliated. I lost my jobs because I have a problem with keeping my mouth shut when I see something wrong. And I was late on my car payment because my sister's daughter needed medicine and her insurance didn't cover it. She lifted her chin. So yes, I have poor judgment. I'm a terrible employee. You definitely shouldn't hire me. For a long moment, Marco just stared at her. Then, impossibly, the corner of his mouth twitched. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was something. Sit down. I'm sorry? The interview. Sit down. He gestured to the massive dining table. Unless you have somewhere else to be. Elena looked at the table, then at him, then at the 2 children who had stopped crying and were now watching her with cautious curiosity. She should leave, should walk out of this mansion and never look back. Everything about Marco Vittorio screamed danger, from his cold eyes to his expensive suit to the casual way he'd struck another person. But Elena had $17 in her checking account, a sister who wanted her gone, and rent due in 3 weeks that she had no way to pay. And those 2 children looked so small and so scared. She sat down. Marco took the seat at the head of the table, and the shift in his posture was subtle but unmistakable. This was a man who was used to power, who wore authority like a second skin. He folded his hands on the polished wood. My children need stability. Structure. Someone who won't feed them garbage or let them stay up until midnight watching television. Someone who understands that every person who enters this house is a potential threat, and that my enemies would love nothing more than to get their hands on 2 innocent targets. Elena's mouth went dry. Your enemies. I run a complex business enterprise, Miss Morrison. Not everyone approves of my methods. His gray eyes held hers. I need someone who will protect my children. Who will put their well-being above everything else, including their own comfort. Including their safety, if it comes to that. You're asking me to be a bodyguard. I'm asking you to be a nanny. My children already have bodyguards. What they need is someone who will care whether they're happy, whether they feel safe, whether they eat something other than whatever the cook throws together. He glanced at the children. Come here, both of you. The boy took his sister's hand and led her over slowly. Up close, Elena could see the resemblance to their father, the same sharp features, the same gray eyes. But where Marco's face was all hard lines and cold calculation, theirs still had softness, vulnerability. This is Luca, Marco said, gesturing to the boy, and Sophia. Luca is 7. Sophia is 5. They've been in my custody for 6 months, and in that time, I've gone through 8 nannies. The first one stole from me. The second one was on the payroll of a rival family. The 3rd through 7th were simply incompetent. And Mrs. Pritchard, as you witnessed, didn't last much longer. Sophia was staring at Elena with enormous gray eyes. Her dark hair hung in tangles around her face, and there was a smear of something, maybe jam, on her dress. Elena smiled at her. "Hi, Sophia. I'm Elena." The little girl didn't smile back, but she didn't hide either, which Elena counted as progress. "Tell me, Miss Morrison," Marco continued, "why should I trust you with my children when you can't even manage to hold down a job?" It was a fair question. Elena looked at Luca and Sophia, at the way they stood so close together, at the wariness in their expressions that no child should have to wear. "Because I'm not afraid of you," she said finally, "and your children need someone who isn't afraid of you." The silence that followed was deafening. Then Marco stood up, and Elena's heart jumped into her throat. But he didn't yell, didn't threaten. He just walked to a sideboard against the wall and pressed a button. A moment later, a man in a dark suit appeared in the doorway, one of the bodyguards, Elena assumed. "Tony, escort Miss Morrison to the kitchen. She and the children are going to have breakfast. Real breakfast, not whatever Mrs. Pritchard was feeding them." Marco checked his watch. "I have a meeting in 20 minutes. When I return, we'll discuss terms." Elena stood up slowly. "You're hiring me?" "I'm giving you a trial period, 1 week. If my children are alive, healthy, and haven't been traumatized further by the end of that week, we'll discuss a permanent position." He turned those cold eyes on her again. "Fair warning, Miss Morrison. My world is not kind. It's not safe. And if you accept this position, you're accepting everything that comes with it. There won't be any going back." She should say no, should thank him politely and leave, and find a normal job working for normal people who didn't talk about enemies and threats and protecting children like they were discussing the weather. But Sophia had moved closer, and when Elena looked down, the little girl was reaching for her hand. "Okay," Elena said softly. 1 week. Marco nodded once, then walked out of the room without another word, leaving Elena alone with 2 traumatized children, a bodyguard named Tony, and the growing certainty that she'd just made either the best or worst decision of her entire life. The kitchen was a cathedral of stainless steel and marble, bigger than Elena's entire childhood home. Sophia hadn't let go of her hand since they'd left the dining room, and Luca trailed behind them, silent and watchful in a way that made Elena's heart ache. Tony, the bodyguard, leaned against the wall by the door, arms crossed. He was probably in his 40s, built like someone who'd spent significant time in a gym, with a scar running through his left eyebrow that suggested he'd seen his share of trouble. "So," Elena said brightly, opening the massive refrigerator, "what do we want for breakfast? And before you answer, I should tell you that I make really excellent pancakes. My mom taught me when I was little, and they're kind of my specialty." Sophia looked up at her, then at her brother. Luca shrugged slightly. "Do you like pancakes?" Elena asked, pulling out eggs and milk. "We don't know," Luca said finally. His voice was quiet, formal. "Mrs. Pritchard said Mr. Vittorio preferred we eat protein and vegetables, no sugar." Elena paused, a carton of eggs in her hand. "You've never had pancakes?" Both children shook their heads. "What about ice cream? Birthday cake?" More head shakes. Elena set the eggs down carefully and crouched so she was at eye level with Sophia. "Sweetheart, when's your birthday?" "December 3rd, Luca answered for his sister. "She doesn't talk much." "That's okay. She doesn't have to talk if she doesn't want to." Elena smiled at Sophia. "December 3rd. That's only about a month away." "Did you have a party last year?" Luca's expression shuddered. "We weren't here last year." There was a story there. Elena could feel it, but she didn't push. Instead, she stood up and started pulling out mixing bowls. "Well, pancakes aren't exactly birthday cake, but they're still pretty great. And I promise if your dad gets mad about it, I'll take the blame." "Deal." For the first time since Elena had arrived, Luca almost smiled. "You're different from the other nannies." "Yeah? How so?" "You're not scared of him. Everyone's scared of him." Elena measured out flour, thinking about Marco Vittorio's cold eyes and casual violence. "I didn't say I wasn't scared. I just said I'm not afraid. There's a difference. What's the difference?" Being scared means you freeze up. Being not afraid means you do what needs to be done, even though you're scared. She cracked an egg into the bowl. Like right now, I'm terrified I'm going to mess up these pancakes, and you'll both hate them, and your dad will fire me on my first day. But I'm making them anyway, because you both look like you could use some pancakes. Sophia giggled. It was barely more than a breath, but it was there. Elena's chest tightened. Oh, so you think that's funny? You think I'm going to mess up? Sophia giggled again, louder this time, and Luca was definitely smiling now. Okay, challenge accepted. I'll show you both. These are going to be the best pancakes in Boston. Elena started whisking the batter with exaggerated intensity. Maybe the best pancakes in all of Massachusetts, possibly the entire East Coast. The entire world? Luca asked. And there was something lighter in his voice now. Something that sounded almost like hope. Well, I don't want to brag, but Elena poured batter onto the heated griddle and watched it sizzle. Yeah, probably the entire world. She was so focused on the pancakes and the children that she didn't notice Tony had pulled out his phone until she heard the low murmur of his voice. Yeah, boss, you're gonna want to see this. Marco returned 40 minutes later instead of the promised 20 minutes, and he found Elena and his children at the kitchen island, surrounded by a stack of pancakes that had to be at least 15 high, a bottle of syrup, and what appeared to be an entire can of whipped cream. Sophia had whipped cream on her nose. Luca was smiling. And Elena Morrison was laughing at something his daughter had just done, some gesture that Sophia only made when she was truly comfortable with someone. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching. Tony caught his eye and gave a small nod, as if to say, I know, right? The table feels right again. The thought came unbidden, and Marco shoved it away immediately. He didn't do sentiment, didn't do soft. Sentiment got people killed in his world. He'd learned that the hard way 6 months ago when his half-brother Nico had died in a car accident that Marco still suspected hadn't been an accident at all, leaving 2 traumatized children and a will that named Marco, a man who knew nothing about raising children, as their legal guardian. 6 months of watching his children flinch when he entered a room. 6 months of nannies who saw dollar signs, or information to sell, or simply couldn't handle the unique pressures of working for the Vittorio family. 6 months of Marco lying awake at night, wondering if he was failing the only thing Nico had ever asked him to do. And now, here was Elena Morrison, a woman with $17 in her checking account, and a history of poor judgment, making his children laugh. Mr. Vittorio! Elena looked up, startled, and there was a smear of flour on her cheek. You're early. You're right on time. We made pancakes. I know you said protein and vegetables, but I thought just this once. It's fine. Marco walked to the island and Sophia immediately stopped smiling, her small body going tense. He felt the familiar stab of guilt and pushed that away too. Did you enjoy breakfast? Sophia nodded, not meeting his eyes. Luca. They were good, sir. His nephew's voice had gone formal again, careful. Thank you for allowing us to have them. Allowing them to have them. As if pancakes were some enormous privilege, as if Marco were a tyrant who dictated every aspect of their lives, which he supposed he was. He looked at Elena. My office, 5 minutes. Yes, Mr. Vittorio. She wiped her hands on a towel, then turned to the children. You two stay here with Tony, okay? I'll be right back. Will he fire you? Sophia's voice was barely a whisper, but they all heard it. It was the first time she'd spoken since Marco had arrived. Elena crouched down and took Sophia's small hands in hers. I don't know, sweetheart. But even if he does, I want you to remember something. You are smart and brave and beautiful, and you deserve all the pancakes in the world. Okay? Sophia's eyes filled with tears, and she threw her arms around Elena's neck. Marco's chest constricted painfully. He turned and walked out before anyone could see the expression on his face. His office was on the 2nd floor. A room of dark wood and leather that smelled like expensive cigars and old money. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the manicured grounds, and the walls were lined with books that Marco had actually read. Mostly history, philosophy, strategy. He'd educated himself long after he'd left the formal school system, driven by the need to prove that he was more than just the muscle his father had always assumed he'd be. Elena entered hesitantly, closing the door behind her. She'd washed the flour off her face, but her hair was still slightly disheveled, pulled back in a messy ponytail that had pieces escaping around her face. "Sit." She sat in the leather chair across from his desk, her hands folded in her lap. Waiting. Marco picked up a file folder, her background check, already updated with notes from Tony about the past hour, and flipped through it slowly. "My daughter spoke to you." "Yes." "She hasn't spoken to anyone except Luca since they arrived here. Not the therapist I hired, not any of the previous nannies, not me." Elena didn't say anything. Smart. "Tony says you told them they'd never had pancakes before, that Mrs. Pritchard had them on some sort of restrictive diet. She probably thought she was doing what you wanted." "What I want," Marco said quietly, "is for my children to be happy. Or as close to happy as they can be, given the circumstances." He closed the file. "Their parents died 6 months ago. Car accident. I was named their guardian because my half-brother knew I could protect them, even if I couldn't give them anything else. I'm sorry. I don't need your sympathy, Miss Morrison. I need your competence." He leaned back in his chair. "The salary is $200,000 a year. You'll live here, in the West Wing with the children. Your room will be between theirs. You'll have 1 day off per week, but you'll remain on the grounds for security purposes. You'll have access to a car and a security detail when you take the children anywhere. And you'll sign an NDA that will ruin you financially if you ever speak about anything you see or hear in this house." Elena's eyes had gone wide. $200,000. The position comes with significant risks. The compensation reflects that." Marco pulled out a contract, already prepared, and slid it across the desk. "You'll also have full health insurance, a retirement account, and a $50,000 signing bonus that you'll receive after your first 6 months of employment." She stared at the contract like it might bite her. Why? Why what? Why me? You could hire someone with actual credentials, someone with experience and references, and my children trust you. Marco cut her off. In 6 months, they've trusted no one, not even me. Sophia spoke to you after 1 hour of pancakes. That's worth more than any credential. Elena picked up the contract, with shaking hands. This seems too good to be true. It's not good, Miss Morrison. It's dangerous. There are people who would hurt those children to get to me. People who would use them as leverage, or worse. He held her gaze. If you take this position, you're putting yourself in the line of fire. Security can only do so much. Ultimately, you'll be their first line of defense. You want me to protect them. I want you to love them. The words came out harsher than he'd intended. Because Mrs. Pritchard didn't. None of the others did. They saw a paycheck and a prestigious address. But Luca and Sophia don't need prestige. They need someone who will fight for them, who will stand between them and anything that threatens them. Elena was quiet for a long moment, reading through the contract. Then she looked up, and Marco saw something in her eyes that he recognized. Determination. Stubbornness. The same thing that had made her speak up in the dining room when the smart thing would have been to stay silent. I'll do it, she said, but I have conditions. Marco raised an eyebrow. No one dictated conditions to him. Ever. I'm listening. The children need normalcy. I know your world is dangerous, but they're just kids. They need to go to parks and libraries and birthday parties. They need friends and school, and my children are homeschooled for security reasons. Then they need activities, art classes, music lessons, something. And they need therapy. Real therapy, not just some appointment they sit through once a week. They've been through trauma, and they need help processing it. Anything else? Yes. Elena lifted her chin. You need to stop scaring them. The room went very still. Excuse me? I know you're their guardian. I know you're trying to protect them. But they're terrified of you, Mr. Vittorio. Sophia didn't stop smiling until you walked into the kitchen. Luca's voice changed. They tense up like they're expecting to be hit whenever you're around. I have never, Marco said softly, dangerously, laid a hand on my children. I know, I can tell, but you hit Mrs. Pritchard right in front of them. You fired her without a thought. And yeah, maybe she deserved it, I don't know your full story. But they saw it. They've probably seen a lot of things they shouldn't have seen, and it's affecting them. Marco stood up slowly. You're suggesting I change how I run my household, how I conduct my business. I'm suggesting you be gentler with two traumatized kids who lost their parents and are doing their best to survive in a world that makes no sense to them. Elena stood up too, facing him across the desk. I'll sign your contract. I'll live here. I'll protect them. I'll do whatever you need. But you have to promise me you'll try. You'll try to smile at them sometimes. You'll try to tell them when they've done something right, instead of just when they've done something wrong. You'll try to be the kind of person they can run to, instead of someone they run from. No one had spoken to Marco like this in years, not since he'd taken over his father's business and established himself as someone who didn't tolerate insubordination. He should fire her right now. Should have security escort her out and find someone more compliant, more respectful. But Sophia had spoken to her. Sophia had laughed. And when was the last time Marco had heard either of his children laugh? 1 week, he said finally. We try this your way for 1 week. If I see progress, we continue. If not, you can fire me and we'll try something else. Elena picked up a pen from his desk. Deal. She signed the contract with a flourish, and Marco wondered, not for the first time that morning, what exactly he'd just gotten himself into. The first 3 days were chaos. Elena moved into the West Wing with 2 suitcases and a cardboard box of personal items that made Marco's chest hurt to see. This woman was about to earn more money than she'd probably seen in her entire life, and everything she owned fit into one box. She threw herself into the children's routine with the kind of intensity that was either admirable or insane. Possibly both. She woke them gently, read to them at night, turned every meal into an event. She found an art therapist who specialized in childhood trauma and drove Luca and Sophia to appointments 3 times a week with Tony following in a second car. She researched child development and nutrition and activities until Marco found her at 2 a.m. in the library, surrounded by books, making lists. You should sleep, he told her. She looked up, startled. Her hair was down, falling around her shoulders, and she had reading glasses on that he'd never seen before. I wanted to finish researching music programs. I think Sophia might like piano. She was humming today, and she has a really good ear for pitch. Marco leaned against the doorframe. It's 2 a.m. I know. I'm sorry. I'll be quiet. That's not. He stopped, frustrated. You need to take care of yourself, Miss Morrison. You're no good to my children if you're exhausted. I'm fine. I'm used to running on not much sleep. But even as she said it, she yawned. Marco walked over and gently took the book from her hands. Bed. That's an order. You can't order me to bed. I'm not in the military. I'm your employer, and your contract states you'll maintain your health and well-being. Exhaustion violates that clause. He was making that up, but she didn't need to know that. Go to bed, Elena. It was the first time he'd used her first name, and something flickered in her eyes. But she stood up, gathering her books. Fine. But I'm waking up early to make pancakes. More pancakes? I told Sophia I'd teach her how to make them herself. She's excited about it. Elena paused at the door. You could join us, if you want. I have a meeting at 7. Oh, right, of course. She left and Marco stood alone in the library, holding a book about childhood music education, and wondering why the house suddenly felt emptier. By day 4, Sophia was talking. Not a lot, but enough. She'd whisper comments to Elena, ask questions, even venture small requests. And Luca, Serious, watchful Luca had started to relax. The tight set of his shoulders had eased. He smiled more readily. Marco watched it happen from a distance, coming home from meetings to find the three of them in the playroom or the kitchen or the library, always together. Always engaged in some activity or conversation. Elena caught him watching once, and she'd smiled at him, and Marco had to turn away before she could see whatever expression was on his face. He tried. He'd promised Elena he'd try, and Marco Vittorio kept his promises. He sat with the children at dinner instead of eating in his office. He asked them about their day. He told Luca, good job, when his nephew completed a difficult math problem, and the look of shock and then pure joy on the boy's face was worth every uncomfortable moment. But Sophia still tensed when he entered a room, still watched him warily, like he was a threat she needed to monitor. It was Elena who finally confronted him about it on day 5. She knocked on his office door after the children were in bed, and when he called for her to enter, she closed the door behind her with a quiet click. "We need to talk about Sophia." Marco set down the contract he'd been reviewing. "What about her?" "She's still scared of you." Elena crossed her arms. "And I think I know why." "Enlighten me." "You look like her father. Tony showed me a picture. He thought it might help me understand their history. And you look exactly like Nico. Same face, same build, same gray eyes." Marco went very still. "I'm aware." "So every time Sophia sees you, she sees her dad. The dad who died. The dad she couldn't save. The dad who left her." Elena's voice was gentle now. "And I think she's scared that you'll leave too. That everyone she cares about leaves. So she's trying not to care about you, because it's safer." "What exactly do you want me to do about that?" "Spend time with her. Real time. Not just dinners where you ask how her day was. Play with her. Read to her. Show her that you're not going anywhere." Elena moved closer to the desk. "I know it's not comfortable for you. I know you're busy, and you have a business to run, and this probably feels like a waste of time. But Marco..." The use of his first name startled him again. She seemed to realize what she'd done and corrected quickly. "Mr. Vittorio. She's 5 years old. She's lost everything. And you're all she has left besides Luca. She needs to know you're safe, that you're permanent." Marco looked at this woman who'd been in his home less than a week and had already upended everything. Who'd signed an NDA and a contract and taken a position that could get her killed, all for 2 children who weren't even hers. "You care about them," he said finally. "Of course I care about them. They're wonderful kids. You've known them 5 days. Some things don't take very long to see." Elena held his gaze. "Will you try? With Sophia?" He should say no, should maintain his distance, keep the boundaries clear. Caring about people in his world was dangerous. It gave enemies leverage. It created weaknesses. But he thought about Sophia's gray eyes, so much like Nico's. Thought about how his brother had trusted him with the most precious thing in his life. Thought about the promise he'd made at Nico's funeral that he would protect these children, no matter what it cost him. "What did you have in mind?" Elena smiled, and it transformed her entire face. "Leave that to me." The next morning, Elena woke Marco at 6:30 by knocking on his bedroom door with an insistence that suggested the house was on fire. "What?" He opened the door in his sleep pants and undershirt, hair disheveled, and Elena's eyes widened slightly before she very deliberately looked at his face and nowhere else. "Sophia's birthday is in 3 weeks." "I'm aware." "I want to throw her a party. A real party, with cake and decorations and presents and other kids." Marco rubbed his eyes. "Other kids present a security risk." "Then we'll have it here, with full security. Tony can vet every guest. But she needs this, Marco. She needs to know that birthdays are something to look forward to, not something to dread." "When did she say she dreads birthdays?" "She didn't have to say it. It's in how she talked about December 3rd. Like it's something to endure, not celebrate." Elena held up a notebook. "I made a list. We'll need a cake. I can make it, or we can order one. But I think homemade might be better because she can help. And decorations, but nothing too overwhelming. And presents, but I was thinking maybe we could ask her what she actually wants instead of just guessing. Elena. Marco caught her hand, stopping the flood of words. Her skin was warm under his palm, and he released it quickly. It's 6:30 in the morning. I know. I'm sorry. I'm excited. I've never planned a birthday party before. Never? She shook her head. We didn't really do birthdays when I was a kid. Money was tight, and my mom was working 3 jobs, and it wasn't a priority. But these kids deserve priorities. They deserve to feel special. Marco looked at her, this woman who'd never had a birthday party herself but was standing in his doorway at dawn, bursting with plans to give his daughter one, and felt something shift in his chest. Something dangerous and warm that he couldn't afford to feel. Make the list, he said quietly. Whatever she wants, whatever she needs. Money is not an object. Really? Really. But Elena. Yes? Next time, wait until at least 7 to wake me up. She grinned. Deal. Over the next 2 weeks, Marco watched Elena Morrison transform his daughter. It started small. She'd spend extra time with Sophia in the mornings, just the 2 of them, talking about nothing and everything. She'd bring Sophia into the kitchen and let her help with cooking, narrating every step like it was the most fascinating process in the world. She'd sit with her during piano practice. Sophia had indeed taken to the piano like a natural, and celebrate every new note mastered. And slowly, gradually, Sophia began to bloom. She smiled more, talked more, started asking for things instead of waiting to be offered. She'd tell jokes that didn't quite land, but were adorable anyway. She'd hum while she played with her toys. She started to look like what she was, a little girl, not a trauma survivor. But she still watched Marco warily, still tensed when he entered a room. Elena's solution appeared one evening after dinner. She knocked on his office door, Sophia's small hand held firmly in hers. Sophia has something she wants to show you. If you have a minute. Marco saved the document he'd been working on, a contract that would have significant implications for the family business, but none of that mattered when his daughter was standing in the doorway looking nervous. Of course, come in. Sophia approached slowly, clutching something in her free hand. When she reached his desk, she held it out. It was a drawing. Stick figures, mostly, rendered in crayon. A big house. 3 people, 2 small, 1 large, holding hands. And in the corner, carefully printed in a child's handwriting, my family. Marco's throat closed up. I made it in art therapy, Sophia whispered. Miss Elena said I should show you. He took the drawing carefully like it was made of glass. It's beautiful, sweetheart. That's you, she pointed to the large figure. And that's Luca, and that's me. We're all together. I see that. Miss Elena says families stay together, even when it's hard. Sophia looked up at him with those gray eyes that were so much like Nico's. Are you going to stay? The question hit him like a physical blow. Marco set the drawing down carefully and did something he hadn't done since Sophia and Luca had arrived. He got down on his knees so he was at her eye level. Listen to me very carefully, Sophia. I am not going anywhere. Ever. Do you understand? You are my family now, you and Luca. And families don't leave. Daddy left. Daddy didn't want to leave. He loved you very much. What happened to him was an accident, not a choice. Marco reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and when she didn't, he took her small hand in his. But I'm choosing to stay. Every single day. I'm choosing to be here with you. Nothing and no one is going to change that. Sophia's eyes filled with tears. Promise? I promise. She crashed into him so hard he nearly fell over, her small arms wrapping around his neck with desperate strength. Marco held her, this tiny person who'd been through so much, and felt his own eyes burning. Over Sophia's head, he saw Elena watching from the doorway. She had her hand pressed to her mouth, and her eyes were suspiciously bright. When she caught him looking, she mouthed, Thank you. He nodded, and they stayed like that, him holding Sophia, Elena watching over them both, until his daughter's tears stopped, and she pulled back with a watery smile. "Can I hang my picture in here? So you can see it while you work?" "I'd like that very much." Marco stood, lifting Sophia with him. "How about right here, where I can see it from my desk?" They found some tape, and Sophia carefully hung her drawing on the wall. And when Marco returned to his office later that night, after tucking both children into bed, he sat at his desk and stared at that picture for a long time. His family? When had that happened? Sophia's birthday party was everything Elena had promised, and more. She'd invited 6 children from the art therapy group, all vetted by Tony, all from families who understood the need for discretion. The house was decorated with streamers and balloons, and Elena had made an elaborate castle cake with towers and flags that had taken her 3 days. Sophia wore a purple dress and a tiara, and she'd been vibrating with excitement since she'd woken up that morning. Marco watched from the edge of the room as Elena supervised games and activities, as the children shrieked with laughter and ran through his house like they owned it. He should have been uncomfortable, should have hated the noise and chaos. But Sophia was laughing. Really, genuinely laughing, her whole face lit up with joy. And Elena. Elena was everywhere at once, making sure every child felt included, diffusing conflicts with humor, capturing everything on her phone camera. She'd pulled her hair back in a ponytail, and she wore jeans and a simple blue sweater, and Marco couldn't look away from her. "You're staring, boss." Marco turned to find Tony beside him, arms crossed, wearing an expression that was far too knowing. "I'm observing." "Sure, observing. That's what we're calling it." Tony nodded toward Elena. "She's good for them. For all of you. It's been 2 weeks. Sometimes 2 weeks is all you need." Tony pulled out his phone, checked something, then put it away. "The Calabrese family sent a gift. It's being scanned now." Marco's attention sharpened. The Calabreses were ostensibly allies, but in his world, alliances shifted like sand. What kind of gift? Doll, expensive, antique, could be a peace offering, could be a statement. Hard to say. "Don't let it near the children until we've had it thoroughly examined." "Already on it." Tony paused. "You thinking about what I'm thinking? That the attack on Nico wasn't random? That someone's positioning themselves to move against me, and the children are leverage?" Marco's jaw tightened. "I'm always thinking that." "Miss Elena know what she's really signed up for? She knows enough. Does she know about the shipment coming in next week? The one that's going to piss off the Calabreses and half of Boston?" Marco didn't answer. Elena had signed the NDA, had accepted the security measures, had agreed to put herself in potential danger. But there was a difference between abstract danger and concrete threats. And the shipment Tony was referencing, a major expansion into territory the Calabreses considered theirs, was going to make things very concrete, very quickly. "Keep the security tight," Marco said finally. "Double the perimeter. I want eyes on every approach to the house." "Already done." "But boss?" Tony's voice dropped lower. "If this goes sideways, Miss Elena's going to be right in the middle of it." "She's not trained for this. She's not—" "I know what she's not." Marco cut him off. "Which is why we're going to make sure it doesn't go sideways." Tony nodded and melted back into the security detail positioned around the room. And Marco went back to watching his daughter laugh while trying to ignore the growing certainty that everything was about to change. The party wound down around 4. Parents collected their children, and Sophia hugged each one goodbye with an enthusiasm that made Marco's chest ache. When the last guest left, she ran to Elena and threw her arms around her waist. "Best birthday ever." "Yeah?" Elena hugged her back, laughing. "I'm so glad, sweetheart. Can we do this every year?" "Absolutely. We'll make it a tradition." Sophia pulled back, looked at Marco, then ran to him with the same enthusiasm. He caught her, lifting her up, and she wrapped her arms around his neck. "Thank you, Uncle Marco. I love you." The words stole his breath. He held her tighter. This little girl who'd been so scared of him just weeks ago, who was now saying words he hadn't heard in years. "I love you too, Sophia. So much." When he set her down, she grabbed both his hand and Elena's, pulling them together. "We should take a picture. All of us. Like a real family." Elena met Marco's eyes over Sophia's head, and something passed between them. Something warm and dangerous and entirely too complicated to examine right now. "That's a great idea," Elena said softly. They gathered in front of the castle cake. Marco, Elena, Sophia, and Luca, who'd materialized from wherever he'd been reading. And Tony took the picture on Elena's phone. They stood close. Sophia and Luca in front, Marco and Elena behind them with their hands on the children's shoulders. Like a family. Like something real. Later, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, Marco found Elena in the kitchen, cleaning up the last of the party debris. She'd changed into sleep pants and an oversized sweater, her hair damp from a shower. "You don't have to do that. The cleaning service will handle it tomorrow." She looked up, surprised. "I don't mind. I'm too wound up to sleep anyway." Marco leaned against the counter, watching her work. "You gave my daughter the best birthday she's ever had. She deserved it." Elena wiped down the counter. "Every kid deserves to feel special on their birthday." "Even you?" She paused. "What?" "You said you never had birthday parties growing up. So, when's your birthday, Elena?" "July 9th, but that's not... July 9th. I'll remember that." Marco moved closer. "You're good at this. At caring for them. At making them feel safe. That's my job. It's more than a job. You love them." Elena set down the cloth she'd been using, her expression serious. "Yes, I do. Is that a problem?" "No." Marco reached up, and before he could second-guess himself, he tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. She'd gone very still, her eyes wide. "It's not a problem. It's..." He stopped. What was it? What was he trying to say? That in 2 weeks she'd become essential? That his children lit up when she entered a room in a way they never had for him? That he'd started finding excuses to come home earlier just to see her? That he was falling for her, and it was the most dangerous thing he'd done in years? "Marco?" His name on her lips sent heat through his chest. "Thank you," he said instead. "For everything you've done for them. For us." Elena smiled, and it was soft and warm and everything his life hadn't been in longer than he could remember. "You're welcome." They stood there for a moment, close enough that Marco could see the flecks of gold in her eyes, could smell her shampoo. Something floral and simple. It would be so easy to close the distance, to kiss her, to give in to this pull that had been building since the moment she'd defended Mrs. Pritchard in his dining room. But Elena worked for him, was in his home because he'd hired her, because she needed money and he needed help with his children. The power dynamic was all wrong. And more than that, if he crossed this line, if he let himself care about her the way he was starting to, he'd be painting an even bigger target on her back. So he stepped away. "Good night, Elena." Confusion flickered across her face, then disappointment she tried to hide. "Good night, Mr. Vittorio." The return to formality felt like a wall between them, and Marco told himself it was necessary, told himself it was for the best, told himself he wasn't lying as he walked away from the one person who'd made his house feel like a home. The attack came 3 days later. Marco was in the city, meeting with the Calabrases to finalize terms they wouldn't like, when Tony's call came through. "Boss, we've got a situation." Marco was out of his chair before Tony finished the sentence. "What kind of situation?" "Breach attempt at the south gate. 2 cars, armed occupants. We've got them contained, but where are the children?" "Safe room with Miss Elena, sealed and secured. But boss, they're scared. Sophia's crying. And Miss Elena, I'm on my way." He was out of the building in 60 seconds, his own security detail scrambling to keep up. The drive to the house normally took 25 minutes. Marco made it in 15. The scene at the south gate was controlled chaos. Tony and 6 other security personnel had 2 cars pinned down, and the occupants were being detained. No shots had been fired, which meant either they'd been warned off in time, or this had been a message, not an actual attack. Marco didn't care which. Someone had threatened his home, had scared his children, had put Elena in danger. "Status!" he barked at Tony. "All threats contained. No breach of the house itself. But whoever planned this knew our schedule. Knew you'd be gone." Tony's face was grim. This was coordinated, boss. And it's going to happen again. Marco looked at the detained men, then at his house, where his family was locked in a safe room, terrified. And he made a decision. "Get me Calabrese on the phone. Now." The conversation was brief and brutal. Marco made it clear that any further attempts on his house, his children, or anyone under his protection would be met with a response that would end the Calabrese family permanently. He didn't bluff, didn't threaten, just stated facts in the same tone he'd used to discuss the weather. When he hung up, he turned to Tony. "Get them out of the safe room. All of them. I want them in my office in 5 minutes." The safe room was off the library, a reinforced space with communications equipment and supplies to last weeks if necessary. When Tony opened it, Marco saw Elena first. She had both children wrapped in her arms, Sophia sobbing against her shoulder, Luca's face pale but determined. Elena herself looked shaken but steady. Their eyes met, and something fierce and protective surged through Marco's chest. "Everyone all right?" "We're fine," Elena said, her voice only slightly unsteady. "Tony sealed us in as soon as the alarms went off. The kids were scared, but we're okay." Sophia lifted her head. "Uncle Marco?" He crossed the room in 3 strides and gathered all 3 of them into his arms. "I've got you. You're safe, I promise." They stayed like that for a long moment, and Marco felt Elena's hand on his back, grounding him, reminding him to breathe. Finally, he pulled back. "Luca, Sophia, I need to talk to Miss Elena for a few minutes. Can you go with Tony? He'll stay with you." The children nodded, though Sophia clearly didn't want to let go. But Elena whispered something to her, and Sophia reluctantly followed Tony out of the room. When they were alone, Marco pulled Elena to her feet. "Are you hurt? Did anyone—" "I'm fine. Shaken up, but fine." She gripped his arms. "What happened?" "An attempted breach. The Calabrese's sending a message." Marco's jaw tightened. "I'm handling it." "Handling it how?" "You don't need to worry about that." "Yes, I do. Those are my kids too now." Elena's voice rose slightly. "I have a right to know what kind of danger we're in." "Your kids?" She flushed but didn't back down. "Yes, my kids. I love them, Marco. I'm not just their nanny anymore. She stopped, seeming to realize what she was about to say. "You're what?" "I'm their family," she finished quietly. "Whether you want me to be or not. And that means I need to know what's happening." Marco looked at her, this woman who'd been in his life less than a month, but had somehow become essential to it. Who'd taken a job for money and stayed for love. Who'd just been locked in a safe room with terrified children and was now demanding to know about the dangerous parts of his world because she needed to protect them. He'd been fighting this for weeks, fighting the pull, the connection, the way she made him want things he'd given up on years ago. But standing here with her, seeing the determination in her eyes, and knowing she'd just put herself between his children and potential danger without hesitation. He was done fighting. "The Calabreses want territory I've claimed. They're using scare tactics to try to force me to negotiate on their terms." He kept his eyes on hers. "I'm not going to let that happen. But it means things are going to get worse before they get better." "How much worse?" "Bad enough that you should consider whether you want to stay. I can arrange for you to leave, set you up somewhere safe with enough money to start over. The children would understand." "No." Elena cut him off. "I'm not leaving them. I'm not leaving." She stopped again, but this time Marco didn't let it go. "You're not leaving what, Elena?" "You." The word came out barely above a whisper. "I'm not leaving you, any of you. This is my home now, my family, and I don't run when things get hard." Something broke loose in Marco's chest. Some wall he'd been maintaining. some distance he'd been trying to preserve. And he stopped thinking about power dynamics and appropriate boundaries and all the reasons this was a terrible idea. He framed her face in his hands and kissed her. She made a small sound of surprise, then melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt. The kiss was everything he'd been holding back, desperation and relief and need, and something deeper that he wasn't ready to name yet. When they finally broke apart, Elena was breathing hard, her lips swollen, her eyes wide. That was unprofessional, Marco finished. Inappropriate. Probably a violation of several clauses in your contract. I was going to say perfect. Elena smiled, and it was tremulous, but real. But yeah, probably all those other things too. Marco rested his forehead against hers. I can't promise you safe, Elena. I can't promise you easy. My world is violent and dangerous and full of people who would hurt you to get to me. I know. But I can promise you that I will spend every day of my life protecting you and those children. That you'll always have a home here. That... He pulled back to look at her. That I love you. God help me. I love you. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I love you, too. I've been trying not to, because it seemed crazy and too fast and completely inappropriate. But I do. I love you, and I love those kids, and I'm not going anywhere. He kissed her again. Softer this time, like a promise. Like a vow. They were interrupted by a polite cough from the doorway. Tony stood there with both children, and both Sophia and Luca were grinning. Sorry to interrupt, boss, but the kids wanted to make sure Miss Elena was okay. Elena laughed, wiping her eyes, and opened her arms. Sophia and Luca ran to her, and Marco wrapped his arms around all three of them. His family. Finally, really, his family. So, does this mean Miss Elena is staying forever? Sophia asked, looking between them with hopeful eyes. Marco met Elena's gaze over the children's heads. That depends. Elena, I know this is fast. I know we should probably take things slower, do this the right way. But I've spent my entire life being careful and calculating every move, and for once I want to just... He stopped, took a breath, and took the biggest risk of his life. Marry me. Elena's eyes went wide. What? Marry me. Make this real. Make us a family in every way that matters. Marco kept his eyes locked on hers. I know it's insane. I know you probably want time to think about it. But Elena, I've never been more sure of anything in my life. You belong here. With us. With me. So marry me. Stay. Make the table feel right again for the rest of our lives. Sophia gasped. Luca was grinning so hard it looked like his face might split. And Elena was crying and laughing at the same time. Yes, she said. Yes, you ridiculous, wonderful man. I'll marry you. Marco kissed her again, and Sophia cheered, and Luca made a disgusted face but was still smiling, and Tony was definitely recording this on his phone for posterity or blackmail purposes. Later, after they'd told the children the full story, after Sophia had insisted on planning the wedding immediately, after Luca had given his solemn approval and welcomed Elena officially into the family, Marco and Elena stood together in the library, watching the children sleep in the safe room where Elena had insisted they all camp out for the night. You know I'm still going to make you pancakes every morning, right? Elena said softly. Marriage doesn't change that. I'm counting on it. Marco pulled her against his chest. Though I should probably warn you that as my wife, you'll have even more security. More people watching your every move. More restrictions on where you can go and what you can do. And as your wife, I'll have the authority to tell you when you're being overprotective and need to back off. Elena tilted her head back to look at him. This is going to be interesting. That's one word for it. Marco kissed her forehead. Are you sure about this, Elena? Really sure? Because once you're part of this family, once you're my wife, there's no going back. My enemies become your enemies. My world becomes your world. I'm sure. She turned in his arms to face him fully. Because you're wrong about one thing. I was already part of this family the moment I chose to stay. The moment I chose them. Chose you. The wedding just makes it official. I don't deserve you. Probably not, but you're stuck with me anyway. Elena smiled. Besides, someone needs to make sure you smile occasionally. That you remember that those kids need hugs as much as they need protection. That life is about more than just surviving. Is that what you're going to do? Teach me how to live? Every single day. Elena pulled him down for another kiss. Starting now. And as Marco held her, with his children sleeping peacefully nearby, and the house secured, and the danger temporarily contained, he thought about how 3 weeks ago he'd been alone. Struggling. Failing the only thing that mattered. And now he had this. Had them. Had Elena, who'd walked into his life with nothing and given him everything. The table felt right again. Finally, after all this time, the table felt right.